Hello, BookTube. This evening I'm going to talk about my November manga haul. What I do, for those of you who don't know, is every month I put in a pre order for the following month's forthcoming volumes in the manga series that I actively follow, as well as a debut first volumes of series I would like to check out. Normally, I put in these pre orders with Book People, the great bookstore in Austin, Texas. But this month, I also included one pre order with Powell's, the great bookstore in Portland, Oregon. And that's where I'm going to start with the seventh part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Still Ball Run, Volume 4 by Hirohiko Araki. So, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a long-running manga series. It's approaching its 40th year if it hasn't already passed it. Each part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is in itself a largely self-contained manga series on its own, although earlier parts were more connected due to the influence of recurring characters as well as an overarching arch villain, Dio Brando. Snowball Run is the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to take place in a new timeline. Snowball Run is about a cross-country race from San Diego, California to New York City, New York at the end of the 19th century. The main character is Johnny Joestar, who was an up-and-coming jockey who became paralyzed. At the beginning of the story, he meets a mysterious Neapolitan named Jairo Sapelli, who has a pair of steel balls that he can imbue with an incredible spin that can affect the motion and movement of other objects, including people. And this temporarily gives Johnny the ability to stand and walk. And so Johnny joins the race in order to get close to Jairo and figure out the secret of these balls so that he can walk again. Over the course of the race, it becomes clear that there are mysterious objects scattered along the route that nefarious individuals are after, and that it seems the race itself was constructed around finding these objects. Also, over the course of the race, many of the racers, many of the contestants begin to develop stand abilities, which JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is famous for. So, this volume begins with the conclusion of an arc that began in Volume 3, where Johnny and Jairo have come to a village to recuperate, to spend the night, and they are attacked by dinosaurs. And initially it seems that these dinosaurs are under the control of another member of the race, Diego Brando, who is this world's version of Dio Brando. However, that's not quite the case, although Dio Brando does develop that stand ability for himself. And then the third leg of the race is concluded, and the middle section of this volume deals with a time loop arc that introduces a new character who at this point is in the lead of the race, Hot Pants. And then the volume concludes with a look at who's behind everything and what they're after. And I enjoyed this volume, but I'm not entirely sure a monthly format really works, or the transition from a weekly format to a monthly format was handled all that well. So today I read the 8 volumes that I pre-ordered from Book People, starting with Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 28 by Gege Akutami. So Jujutsu Kaisen is about a young man named Yuji Itadori, who at the beginning of the series joined his school's occult club. And they found a cursed object, a rotten finger of an incredibly evil sorcerer named Sukuna. At the beginning of the story, a cursed spirit comes looking for this cursed object and attacks the club. Intervening is a young Jujutsu sorcerer named Megumi who engages the cursed spirit. Yuji desires to help out because he's a stand-up guy, and so he eats the cursed object. And this allows him to be temporarily possessed by Sukuna. Sukuna destroys the cursed spirit and is then subdued by Megumi's teacher, Gojo. When Yuji comes to, he is informed that he is now a cursed object himself and is going to be executed. However, given that Yuji seems to be more resistant to Sukuna's influence, Gojo successfully argues that maybe we should wait until Yuji has eaten all of Sukuna's fingers before we kill him. And there are 19 more fingers to go. Sukuna has 4 arms. So this volume is 2 volumes away from the end, and so this volume is focused on the big final villain fight, where Yuji and his allies are fighting a Sukuna-possessed Megumi. And the fight is something else. Again, I rather enjoyed this volume, although at certain points, I'm thinking the artwork might have been a bit rushed. And not quite touched up in between the publication in the magazine and in the graphic version or the collected version. Next, I read Kagurabachi Volume 5 by Takeru Hokazono. So, Kagurabachi is about a young man named Yuhiro, whose father was a blacksmith who specialized in forging enchanted blades. Before the series proper begins, a terrorist group of evil sorcerers named the Hishiku assassinate Chihiro's father and steal the enchanted blades. A few years later, Chihiro, having trained with an unknown 7th blade, seeks revenge against the Hishiku, coming up against the Kamunabi, an organization devoted to maintaining the balance in the sorcerer world. So, Volume 5 of Kagurabachi concludes the... see if I can find it. I can never remember what the auction's name is. So I'm going to find it. Okay, the Rakuzaichi. So the Hishiku have placed one of the enchanted blades, the Shinusi, up for auction at the Rakuzaichi auction, which is an underworld auction that sells objects and people to criminal bidders. And the auction is overseen by the Sazanami clan, one of whose members, Hakuri, is, in this case, the white sheep of the family, who is opposed to his family's operations. And he joins with Chihiro to put a stop to it. And so this volume sees the end of this conflict. And oh boy, I loved this volume. I'm really loving Kagurabachi. And I especially enjoyed the fight with the Sazanami patriarch, Kiora. Was really good. And also quite liked the growth and character of Hakuri in this arc. Particularly as much of the storyline is about Hakuri coming into his own. It was really good. I also really enjoyed volume 16 of Dark Gathering by Kenichi Kondo. This is a series about a young man named Kaitaro who can sense the supernatural and is incredibly attractive to the supernatural. Before the series begins, he and his childhood friend Aiko are cursed, and this leads to him being a shut-in. However, he gradually comes out of it, and at the beginning of the series, he undertakes tutoring Aiko's young cousin Yayoi, who can see spirits. And before the series began, her parents were killed in a car accident, and the spirit of her mother was taken by a monstrous embryonic spirit entity. And so Yayoi has set about building an army of malevolent spirits to go after this monstrous spirit baby. This volume begins the conclusion of an arc in which Yayoi, Kaitaro, and Aiko confront a malevolent little shit of a god to protect another student of Kaitaro's, a young woman named Ai, who is the fated sacrificial bride of this little shit of a god. And so Yayoi has set up this elaborate operation to attack and fight this god and to capture him. And that fight continues in this volume, and it seems to be at the closing stages when this volume ends. So I do want to show you one really awesome image from here. That's pretty cool. So this was a lot of fun too. Next up is Sakamoto Days, Volume 19 by Yuto Suzuki. So Sakamoto Days is about Taro Sakamoto, who was a hitman, one of the greatest hitmen. But one day he fell in love and retired from the business and opened up a convenience store. However, at the beginning of the series, a hit is put out on him, and he has to figure out who put the hit out on him and how to take care of it, along with dealing with a number of other shenanigans going on in the assassination world, which he seems to be getting dragged back into. So this volume largely wraps up a long storyline in which so far the main antagonist of the series is launching an assassination attempt on the head of the Assassins Union. And things get a little muddied by the fact that the leader of this organization has multiple personalities, and one of them is an old friend of Sakamoto's and a high-ranking assassin named Nagumo. And this leads to some infighting amongst the highest ranks of the assassination world. So, next up is Volume 3 of Nuei's Exorcist by Kota Kawae. So, Nuei's Exorcist is about a young man named Gakuro, who at the beginning of the series makes a contract with the spirit Nuei in order to fight malevolent spirits that are attacking his school. He then joins a local exorcist group and is, in the second volume, confronted by a rather elite exorcist who wants to take on the contract that Gakuro has made with Nuei for herself, under orders from her family. This volume follows the fallout of Gakuro's victory, as well as setting up the main plotline for the rest of the series. Next is Choujin X, Volume 10 by Sui Ishida. So Choujin X is rather inspired by American superhero comics. In this world, a certain part of the population have superpowers and they're called Choujins. At the beginning of the series, a young man named Tokyo and his friend Azuma are assaulted by what seems to be a Choujin, and they are injected with a formula that transforms them into Choujin. And so initially Tokyo, whose powers develop first, and then later Azuma, joined Yamato Mori, an association who are devoted to policing Choujin, making sure that rogue or malicious Choujin don't attack the civilian population, as well as trying to prevent various disasters from happening. Over the course of the series, Tokyo becomes more and more accomplished as a superhero, and this volume sees the beginning of a massive conflict with another group of Choujin led by an insane prophetess named Zora. If I can. So I really love the artwork of Choujin X. Even though this series, is, I think it's more periodic in Japan. But it's really nice. Following Choujin X was Snowball Earth Volume 7 by Yuhiro Tsujitsugu. So this is about a young man named Tetsuo who, decades before the beginning of the series, piloted a giant robot named Yukio against an invasion of kaiju. An attempt to stop the kaiju from invading Earth failed, and Tetsuo was placed in suspended animation. And when he returns to Earth decades later, the planet has entered into a new ice age. And the survivors of the kaiju invasion are eking out a living in this frozen wasteland. So Tetsuo and Yukio join up with a band of survivors and fight off various kaiju. This volume introduces a new giant robot named Dark Matter and his pilot, as well as introducing a new allies in the war against the kaiju. Although that means separating from the rest of the cast. And one thing about this volume is it introduces a really weird kaiju named Gold Coast. Who basically has developed the personality of a corporate president. And he is a trip of a monster. And I really enjoyed how he is defeated. It's really nice. So, and finally, the first volume of Kingdom by Yasuhisa Hara. So, Kingdom is a historical series set at the end of the Warring States period of Chinese history. It's about a young man named Shin who, at the beginning of the stories, is friends with a young man named Piao. They are war orphans who are eking out an existence as effectively slaves for a locally prominent family. However, the two aspire to become generals, and so when nobody's watching, they practice swordsmanship. One day, a noble from the capital sees them and takes Piao away. And months later, Piao returns and sends grievously wounded and sends Shin to a distant village where he meets a young man remarkably similar to Piao. And this is Ying Zheng, who is more famous as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, who at this point in his kingship has been overthrown by his little shit of a brother. And ministers who support him. So, and so this volume is setting things up, and introducing the characters and stuff. Yeah. So that was my manga reading for the last few days. I'm a bit disappointed, I must admit. I really liked Kagurabachi and Dark Gathering, but the other volumes I wasn't as into. And I'm not entirely sure what that means. But anyway, that's all I have for this evening. So thank you, BookTube. Have a great rest of your evening and rest of your weekend. And I will be back hopefully with new videos on Tuesday. I was about to say Sunday, but Tuesday. So until then, BookTube, thank you. Have a great rest of your evening and stay safe.